and we want to fix that. But the people that come here to this country are doing it because they see this great country called the United States of America, and they want to be here. I would want to be here too. Let's change how we talk about that debate and take the, it's not hate, it's not really hate at all, but take the personalization of it.
Rob? I have to ask right now, regardless of what we do in Syria or not, do you believe that those chemical weapons have the potential to be proliferated or be used in the United States or in Western Europe, whether something is done or something isn't done?
Yeah.
What are we doing, being proactive in making sure that those weapons are not being utilized here, either as an improvised situation, somebody smuggling it in? What are we doing, from the security or, from those sort of levels to keep that from happening to us?
That's a great question. Let me say this. Even though I advocate for a strike in Syria, the strike in Syria is a bad option. The problem is not doing anything is a worse option. So I want to be very clear about something. I don't think there's any good outcome in Syria. If Assad hangs on to power, there's somehow permeated this belief in this country that if he hangs on, he's at least a dictator and he can maintain control. He actually has no control over the eastern two-thirds of his country, and he'll never regain control over the eastern two-thirds. That is going to be Somalia or Afghanistan pre-9/11, regardless of whether Assad stays in power or not. That's lawless. The question of whether he stays in power is whether he holds the channel by the Med that basically connects the roots of Hezbollah and arms shipment from Iran to Israel. Proliferation of WMD out of Syria is a huge concern, and I can tell you it's one that I think this government is taking very seriously. There's a lot of things I can't necessarily say, but I will say we have fantastic intelligence of Syria to be able to understand what's going on at any given moment there. And I'll also say that the Jordanians and their special forces are very good, and they also are very understanding of the risk that exists. So if there is a serious concern of that, then I think you'll see the international community probably take action. The problem is I think it's going to happen regardless, because Assad, even if he stays in power, there's just no good options out there, unfortunately.
Very good.
Thank you for being here, Congressman.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah, we waited a long time. So thank you for coming up.
Somebody was tweeting. Who was tweeting? Was it you? Somebody was tweeting. At Rep Kinzinger, are you coming? I saw your tweet. And I was like, yes.
Like a needy girlfriend.
Well, I wanted to thank you for your service, and I also wanted to thank you so much for bringing up the cost-benefit analysis when talking about such a controversial issue like Syria. Now, I wanted to know if you valued more the children's lives that were lost in the chemical attack or the children's lives that will be lost from the cruise missiles that are currently stationed and the warships ready to be launched.
So basically you're trying to draw me into this collateral damage. Warfare sucks. Warfare stinks. Sometimes there's collateral damage. I can tell you in discussions and briefings I went through today, minimizing collateral damage is at the utmost of this administration's concern of what they want to do. I believe the delay has actually made collateral damage more likely because he's moved this into populated areas. And I believe it's a terrible thing. But I believe a child suffocating to death by his own, basically, ruler, and then the potential of that happening repeatedly until the international community steps in. Obviously, you know the answer. Both lives are precious. But if unfortunate collateral damage happens, which again will take every means so that it doesn't happen, if that happens, but that prevents a dictator from doing what he does to his own people repeated times into the future, that's a decision that every war planner, every president, now every congressman and senator has to make.
That's really good. No, right there. Yeah. Yes.
So how assured are you that a unbelievably small, as Carrie said today, is going to teach a lesson to Assad and not just be, oh, well, they're just going to come in and go out? We've already kind of warned him we're coming. He can be moving things, and it's only going to be a small little attack. How assured are you that this attack is going to actually deter him in the future?
I don't know the answer to that. I look at history. I look at, we all know the whole situation in Iraq, but before 2003, when we had weapons inspectors going into Iraq would kick them out, we played this dog and pony show. And then we did Operation Desert Fox, a 3-day intense bombing campaign of Saddam's stuff, and he relented because he realized keeping inspectors out was costing him a lot more than anything he would gain. That's the hope with Assad here as well. Unbelievably small was the stupid, I made that clear to the White House Chief of Staff today, by the way, he got it. But what you have is an administration, it's the same administration that says, we're surging troops into Afghanistan, but they're leaving right away in 2014. You know, Taliban have a saying that says America has the watches, but we have the time. So when you say that we're leaving in 2014, you've just emboldened the enemy to stick it out until 2014. This administration, instead of coming up with resolute leadership, we have to win in Afghanistan. We will win in Afghanistan. We're not going to be defeated on the battlefield. The only way we'll be defeated is by our will. And the Afghan people have risen up. 60% of them are under the age of 20. If he would make this case, the American people, that's why the American people don't support Afghanistan, because the commander-in-chief has never made the case for it. He called it the good war and then never made the case after he got elected. Same thing's happening in Syria. I believe the strike will be more significant than unbelievably small. But the president is trying to win the doves of the Democrat Party over by saying, we're just going to kind of slap them. It's not going to be that bad, don't worry. But then they're trying to thread the needle with the Hawks, who want a little more of a robust response, and they're bungling the whole thing up. So that's what you see. Am I confident that this is going to be it? Not overly. I haven't seen the White House's war plan. But I do think the cost of inaction is far greater. And here's the question for you. Israel, which obviously Israel would take the brunt of any reaction by Assad, Israel strongly supports this. They won't come out because they don't want to stir up the Middle East, but they strongly support this.
This is a two-part question. First thing is you talked about least bad options. And like you said, 2 years ago this would have been a totally different ballgame, but now you've got two sides on a civil war where neither one of them is good. You've got Assad on one side, he's killing his own people, he's a brutal dictator. But on the other side, you've got rebels that have been infiltrated by Al-Qaeda and a lot of other radical elements that want to do damage to the United States. If we were to strike, what if this were to turn into some sort of a Libya? What do you see as the ideal outcome from strikes, the first part? And the second part being, to the hawks that you mentioned that would generally be for intervention, but have said, because of sequester cuts, we cannot afford to get involved. What would you say to them in order to, kind of some of those concerns?
I agree sequester is terrible for the military. It's a bad thing. It needs reversed, but it needs reversed with cuts elsewhere. We've got to get our national debt in line. We're not going to just reverse it and add more to the debt. We're not going to do it. But sequester is terrible for our military. Here's a way to think of it. So we spend, $600 billion in the military. It's actually significantly lower than that now. But a third of that expenditure is personnel. Okay? So that's like, salaries, retirements, all that. It's personnel costs. So 2/3 is actually really what we're spending on the military. So when you cut 10%, you're cutting 10% off of this, but if you actually look, you're cutting far significant more than 10% out of operations and maintenance and procurement of new aircraft and stuff like that. That's why when I hear people say, well, it's just 10%. No, actually, when you take it, it's actually almost 20%, 25% out of the O&M budget. It's a terrible thing. What was the first part of your question?
If we strike, what do we see as a suitable replacement for Assad? Al-Qaeda and the rebels on one side and Assad on the other.
There's no great replacement right now, and that's why I've always urged, for 2 years, I've urged the administration to train good rebels on the ground, to get ourselves ready to help implement, not with our troops on the ground, but help implement a new government once the time comes, to not do what we did in Iraq, where we de-Baathified the whole place, but leave the institutions of government in power. Look, there are bad people on the rebel side. You saw it, the guys that executed people, that ate hearts. I mean, these are some terrible people. There are also some pretty good people on the opposition. There's the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army is really dedicated to a secular Syria. They want a Syria like it looked like without an evil dictator. They want a Syria that looks like Egypt used to look like without a dictator. So that's the goal. We should have been engaging and working with these people a long time ago. But if we're all sitting here in this room and we're all equally powerful, but one of us pulls out a gun, that person becomes the most powerful person in the room. And that's what you have now in Syria, is you have these evil groups backed by some state actors that are basically Al-Qaeda linked, that are getting arms and getting weapons, and they're becoming powerful when you have the Free Syrian Army that's not getting the equipment it needs because you have a paralyzed democratic West that's unable to do anything about